Jim Boeheim in the month of March is a magical man. Welcome into the Ostrom Avenue podcast. Owen Valentine, Ben Shulman, Johnny Gadamowitz, talking about Sweet 16 basketball. I'll tell you what, we just talked briefly before we started recording. I don't think any of us thought we were recording a podcast previewing the Sweet 16 game. This was the anticipated season recap type podcast, tournament recap type podcast. But boy, are we excited to be able to continue talking Cuse basketball and prime Syracuse basketball for another week as they head into the Sweet 16 with a game against a good Houston squad that we'll get into later in the episode. If you're with us on YouTube, thank you so much. Hi, how are you? Good to see you guys. Thank you so much. If you're new to us, subscribe, like the video if you like what you see. We'd love to have you join the Ostrom community. If you're listening to us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Ostrom Avenue Pod for our in-game thoughts, our in-week thoughts. I'm sure we'll have a lot of different ideas and concepts going leading up to Saturday's game with Houston. But before we get into Houston, you've got to start with last night. Syracuse edges out West Virginia in a game that they were dominating for a while and controlled the pace a while. West Virginia clawed back. I think everyone got extremely panicked, myself included, when Dolezaj picks up the fourth. And then Jesse was like, oh, Marek's got four. Why don't I get four as well? Join his party. And then Marek finally comes out and plays this astounding four-foul, 10-minute, 15-minute run in the second half. And Syracuse is able to just edge out the Mountaineers. I mean, I was fired up last night. I think everybody was fired up last night. What was just the initial reaction from you guys? Because I think we were on the same page for a little bit that, you lose the first round or you make it to the Sweet 16. But I'm not really sure we all were, true believers in that being the mentality when West Virginia and Syracuse tipped off last night.
No, I didn't have incredibly high hopes for the Orange. West Virginia was and is a really good basketball team. And didn't play well for a large portion of the first half and then turned it on, really on the back of 7 threes from McNeil. It was, 7 threes from Sean McNeil. But you mentioned the Marek Dolezaj and Jesse Edwards fouls. I thought at that point, well, Syracuse has played a great game, but this is it. They're going to foul out or they're going to have to go to John Bull or Frank Anselem, and the Mountaineers are going to go on a big run, and Syracuse isn't going to be able to claw their way back into it. And I think Marek deserves a ton of credit. You said it, the final stretch, I believe he came back in with like 12:30 on the clock and 4 fouls and played solid defensive basketball without picking up a fifth. Now, it would have been awesome if he had done that for the first, 28 minutes of the game and not picked up the 4 fouls. But he, he's probably second in line. It's a battle between him and Quincy behind Buddy for who helped the Orange the most, actually, and Joe. It was a team effort, really, all around. But Marek's not going to get a lot of credit, I think, because everyone's focused on Buddy and the 3-point shooting of Joe. But 12 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. He doesn't end with the team high in assists, but I think he was the best passer in that game and really showed it late with a lot of great dimes to people cutting to the rim. So, Marek kind of in that final stretch really wins it for Syracuse with, of course, the help of Buddy just going nuts once again.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but my heart rate for the duration of that game was probably the quickest my heart rate has been for a sporting event in quite some time. But look, Syracuse did what they needed to do. Obviously, we knew they were going to look to continue to play through Buddy Boeheim, and that's exactly what happened. He was really firing away without hesitation. And there were stretches in that first half where he wasn't making shots left and right, but still finishes the day 6 of 13 from downtown. I mean, if you're firing away from downtown 13 times, it doesn't get more confident than that. But really the unsung hero of this game has to be Dolezaj. And, going into the game, if you were going to tell me that Marek was going to be tied for the second leading scorer on the team, I would say, I don't know. I'm not so sure, because we all know, it's not his role on this team to put the ball in the hoop, but really just an astounding effort on the defensive end. Obviously, the foul trouble is concerning. For me, what's even more concerning is that, Jesse Edwards does pick up those 4 fouls as well in only 7 minutes of action. So, you look at Dolezaj and obviously his ability to limit the fouls there in that second half, whereas Edwards, on the other hand, was seemingly picking one up every 30, 45 seconds. If this is a pattern that is going to develop over time, which we've seen it before, it's happened plenty of times. There's no reason to believe that we won't be in a similar situation for this Houston game. But I think Jesse Edwards is going to need to be a little more aware of that moving forward. I mean, look, we obviously all know he's not the best player in the world on the defensive end, but just having that body in there to man the middle of the 2-3, really, it can't be overstated how important that is, whether it's Marek, whether it's Edwards. And that's a big reason why I think Hughes was able to pull this one out.
You look at Edwards, and I mean, he's had such a good stretch coming in off the bench and really filled out his role. And Jim has always been saying he's not quite ready. And I think that it showed a lot last night. He had that stretch that was really, really solid and is definitely making improvements and is showing the talent level is there and the basketball skills are there. He just wasn't quite ready or mentally prepared or whatever it was last night. When you just sort of run through the play-by-play, he subs in at 14:56 in the second half, 14:41 fouled by Jesse Edwards. 13-12, fouled by Jesse Edwards. 12:48, fouled by Jesse Edwards, sub out, 12:48. It was so quick, so fast. You needed him to chew time for Dolezaj. And you know what? In hindsight, it sort of worked in Syracuse's favor, because Dolezaj comes back in and dishes out 4 of his 5 assists in the second half, really facilitated the offense. I was dying at the end of the game. You're not having the ball in your guard's hands. It was just Dolezaj handling the ball at the top of the arc. It was one of those situations where you always knew that Dolezaj could do it, because you can outlet to Dolezaj, he'll bring the ball up the court. But seeing him in late game situations, holding the ball at the top of the zone or at the top of the arc, and then facilitating it and finding backdoor cutters and making no look passes that lead to a pass to assist for wide open threes. Dolezaj was the key to that win outside of Buddy. I think Buddy's, clutch shooting down the stretch was massive. 22 second half points for Boeheim cannot go understated. It was clutch. They were at perfect timing when West Virginia was really clawing back in and the offense went entirely stagnant. Buddy hit a couple of shots that really revitalized and revived this team. And without those shots, I mean, Syracuse doesn't win this game, but without Marek Dolezaj coming in and really being that offensive facilitator and being the guy that was running the offense as the 5 on the court, speaks to the player that Dolezaj is. I think I tweeted Dolezaj the distributor last night. Just the vision was unparalleled. We always knew he was such a solid passing big, and it showed last night in in the biggest game of the season, but in one of the biggest ways it's been seen out of Dolezaj this year.
I think, we can go around and give some other credit, though. Even though Dolezaj, I would agree that Dolezaj is probably the next in line behind Buddy. Syracuse doesn't build the lead it builds in the first half without Joe, who admittedly and really I have emphasized has not played very well this year. But he shot efficiently in the first half and ended with 12 points on 4 of 8 shooting from deep and from the field. He puts in 7 assists, which is one of the highest totals he's had all season, and 6 rebounds. That's one thing that I think carried into both halves. He rebounded pretty strong considering the team didn't rebound well at all.
Third straight 6 rebound game for Girard. Third
Wow.
straight. He's been crashing the boards.
And then helping him on the boards, Quincy puts in 7 rebounds, 12 points himself, 2 of 3 from deep, and 5 blocks, which I don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to assume is the season high for Quincy Guerrier with 5 blocks. So, Owen, one of your keys before the game was multiple scorers. And it actually was a key to the San Diego State game, now that I'm remembering correctly, not the West Virginia game. But they got it in the West Virginia game. And it was really important because Buddy, while he was great, was not great in the first half. Only had 3 points heading into the break. And these other guys carried the load long enough so that when Boeheim heated up, Syracuse was in a position to win. And then Buddy carried them to the finish line.
Yeah, and I think it's important to credit the Syracuse defense as well, because as much as everything was clicking on the offensive end, I mean, you hold Miles McBride to 11 points, who really is the focal point of this West Virginia offense. Obviously, McNeil had himself a day going 7 for 13 from downtown. But McBride was going to be the X factor. If you could find a way to slow him down, that was going to open up so much more, especially on the offensive end for Syracuse as well. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there because, what we'll hit on this a little more later, obviously, but you look at this Houston team and they are not a team by any means that, there's 5 or 6 guys that really scare you too much. I mean, you look at the box score for their win yesterday against Rutgers. I think it was only 2 guys in double figures for Houston. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on because look, we've said it time and time again. This is a 2-3 zone defense that teams just are not used to for whatever reason it is. And yeah, Houston's going to have some time to prepare. Obviously, no game until the nightcap. I believe it's 9:55 Saturday night. So make no mistake, they'll be doing everything they can to get ready for it. But when you're in that in-game environment, it's just such a non-traditional approach. And Syracuse really seems to have just found a way to master it at this point. And we haven't seen any team really figure it out too much. Now, if there's a team that's going to, perhaps maybe it is Houston. I'm not sure about you guys. Feel free to chime in here, but I'm watching that Houston-Rutgers game last night. And I find myself rooting for Houston, despite the fact that they're a 2 seed compared to Rutgers being the 10. Rutgers is, I think, the bigger team, more built on the interior. Would have created a couple of mismatch problems, I think. Whereas if I'm a Syracuse fan, I'm cautiously optimistic about feeling pretty good heading into this weekend Sweet 16.
Yeah, the only thing I counter with is not only did Syracuse hold McBride, but they also held Derek Culver to pretty much nothing. And he was a big guy that I think a lot of people were worried about. So I think there are 2 ways to look at it. Syracuse, the 2-3 is always going to limit a certain guard if it wants to key in on that guard. Obviously, McNeil was not the guy that the Orange keyed in on yesterday. But also, someone like Ron Harper Jr. could have trouble because look at what they did to someone with a similar body type in Culver, albeit Harper Jr. probably scores at 3 levels more. But yeah, I think the defense has been great. I think even Virginia, who scored on it a little bit in the ACC tournament, still for the most part was held to pretty inefficient offense, and everyone else since Syracuse beat North Carolina near the end of the regular season has been held to pretty inefficient offense. It's interesting as we transition, towards Houston. It's, another team that shoots the 3 well, but for Syracuse, they've kind of scaled down in each matchup. The first matchup, San Diego State, one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country at nearly 38%. Then West Virginia, they're over 36%, still very strong. Now Houston shoots 35% as a team, which is good, but now we're getting into it, it's not remarkable. So it'll be interesting to see, what Boeheim wants to do to game plan for Grimes and company, because while Houston doesn't shoot it exceptionally from 3, they do shoot it a lot. They get 35% of their points from 3-point range, and that's near the top 50 in the country in terms of 3-point distribution. So it's an exciting matchup for the Orange, but it's going to be a tough one, I think, against the highest remaining seed in the region.
I got just a couple of quick points I want to hit before we completely dive into Houston. One, Buddy Boeheim with just 3 first-half points, but I think that you can sort of give him virtual assists or mental assists on a lot of those buckets. He was the focal point of that West Virginia defense, and just him being on the court created so many options for other people just because of the defensive attention that he warrants the way he's been playing right now. So I think despite his 3 first half points, he was the big reason that Girard was able to get some shots. And that's what really allowed Syracuse to get that lead going in the early going. I tweeted, I believe, over at Ostrom Avenue Pod, just talking about how you don't need Buddy to necessarily go off the entire game. You just need him to be competent enough on the court to be able to warrant the defensive attention that he should get, and that creates the shots. And I got to tip the cap. I know Ben mentioned it a little bit, to Girard, who is now back-to-back games, has stepped up for big stretches when Buddy was in foul trouble in that San Diego State game, and then unable to get an open look in the first half of this West Virginia game. Girard has stepped up big time both of those games. And I said it, I think we all can agree, Joe Girard in front of fans is a brand new Joe Girard. He has played with that swagger that you saw last year, that confidence, that fun to watch play style that you've seen out of him. And he has really elevated. And then the last West Virginia point I want to hit on is just, this is now a bad stretch from Alan Griffin in terms of consecutive games where he has been unable to get things going. Fortunately for the Orange, Braswell has come in and really been able to jump into the zone. And that's where Boeheims says his minutes are being warranted from, is Braswell's defensive play. But last night, I think there was a stretch where Braswell really wasn't doing anything for me on the defensive half. And we all know that he can get his shot offensively if he's open, but he looked a little hesitant to shoot. And so there was a stretch that I was just like, maybe give Griffin a shot, because the defense isn't really shutting West Virginia down at this point. And if nothing else, Griffin has the capabilities to create his own shot. I'm really curious to see how that sort of parlays into Houston, and to see, I mean, to go macro here, how does that parlay into next year when you've got Braswell, who's seemingly jumping Griffin right now, and then you bring in a guy like Benny Williams. So I'm sure that's a conversation for another time, but it's just something that is Ben seems to want to jump in here, because I think we've got something sparked here.
Well, that assumes that Alan Griffin is wearing a Syracuse orange jersey next year.
Yeah, I don't want to jump to that just yet, but I don't think it's a conversation that is completely muddled at this point in time.
Although
but for the
I'm
time
sure,
being, he made it further. He made it further with Syracuse.
No, I was just gonna say, I'm sure. I don't know. I'm wondering how Alan Griffin is feeling, because while maybe he doesn't have the hot hand by any stretch of the term, he still made it further in March Madness with Syracuse than he would have with Illinois. So take with that what you will.
Exactly. So and what I will say is, despite him playing 11 minutes last night, he was a part of the bench mob. He was having a blast. It looked like one of the guys that was the most into it. So despite him playing, sparse minutes, only 11 minutes out of Griffin last night, it is still a really good sign to see him be that involved and upbeat and positive, and really just here for what the team needs at this point. Because with a guy who, comes in with those expectations and comes in with the expectations to start and be playing 30 plus minutes a game, you can easily sort of get in your headspace and not be able to be a phenomenal teammate at that point. And from what I've seen on the bench these last 2 games, I mean, when he was on the sidelines, he was as involved as anyone. I'm not the biggest Chaz Owens fan, but he is always dancing on the sidelines, so he gets his screen time. And Alan Griffin was right there with him in terms of Chaz Owens, Alan Griffin just involved on the sidelines. And then I'm sure Jesse Edwards is always dancing on the sides too, and I love to see that. But when Ben's ripping on me, scholarship player Chaz Owens, that was not my favorite Syracuse move, but I'm glad the family is still involved with Syracuse basketball. So I'll give them that. Let's move into Houston. It is a very good Houston team. I'll go with a quick KenPom rundown. Number 7 in offensive efficiency, number 12 in defensive efficiency. They play a slow game of basketball, but they are one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country, despite not really having that much size. I watched that Houston game last night with Rutgers, and there are just some plays that this team is a good offensive rebounding team. When they take a 3 and you've got one guy that drops back to prevent the break, and the other 4 crash incredibly hard, that's where they get their offensive boards. That could be nightmare fuel for Syracuse in this matchup on Saturday.
Yeah, I think part of the offensive rebounding, and that this doesn't make it better nor worse for SU, is just part of the fact that Houston shoots so many threes. I mean, that 42% of their shots are 3-point attempts. And against Syracuse, teams already shoot a ton of threes. So I guess in a way, the Orange are somewhat prepared for that play style. But the Cougars are going to be a really serious test for SU. The positive, as you said, not a ton of size. You look at the main contributors. I mean, you look at the whole roster. No one's taller than 6'8". No one is heavier. They have a 240. He doesn't really play. So I'm going to say no one is heavier than 225, which is smaller and lighter than what you would say for tallest and heaviest for SU. That is obviously a positive. The negative, though, of course, is they still find a way to get on those boards. And they play great defense. You look at Houston, their Ken Palm is lighting up green because they do a lot of things really well. But they really limit opponents both from 3-point range and inside the arc. I do think, they have a really brutal free throw percentage allowed. Like teams only shoot 65 against them. That seems to me like you get lucky a lot. That's what I usually take away from that. Or you play in a poor conference that just can't shoot free throws very well. But also they don't they give up very few blocks and steals. Their block steal percentage is allowed is pretty solid. So overall, a lot of things that are dangerous about this Houston team. The thing that I think is least dangerous about the Cougars, the teams they played. You look on November 29th, Houston beat Texas Tech, a very, very legitimate basketball team who just got knocked out. After that, is there any win that I'm really that impressed by? No. There's a home win and a neutral win against Memphis. There's a win against Wichita State. Like SMU is all right, but seriously not a lot going on here in terms of the schedule. And not a lot of these top tier wins came on the road. The Texas Tech win was neutral. A lot of the other big wins come at home. So there is a school of thought that Houston is not as good as they've been ranked all year, that they have a great record, but it's not against good competition. There are some factors that could say that's a somewhat warranted opinion.
Yeah, coming out of the American Athletic Conference, which, look, by no means is a powerhouse in terms of what you're going to see there from a regular season conference schedule. What scares me, though, about this Houston team is this is a team that can win when they're scoring a bunch. And even on their offensive off nights, they still find ways to win. Just, being scrappy on the board. I mean, look, they only scored 63 points yesterday against a very good Rutgers team and still found a way to squeak it out. I think 5 different players registered at least 4 rebounds. So it's not just the guys down low. You mentioned it, Owen. Everybody crashing the boards. For Syracuse, Ben, something you mentioned earlier as well. The Orange didn't have a great day at the line yesterday either. It was just I believe 7 for 11 from the charity stripe. And this is a Syracuse team more so last year, but even this year too, that, free throw shooting has really been a strong point. So look for that to be big tomorrow as well. But look, Houston's a number 2 seed for a reason. I think maybe the weakest number 2 seed of the field back when you look at the initial bracket that was released, but still a 2 seed nonetheless. So obviously they're going to come into this one the favorites. I think it hurts Syracuse that you don't play this game until Saturday, because if there's one thing we all know about March, it's that momentum is a scary, scary thing. And you look at 5 days between now and then, and I think it's no secret that this is a Q's team that momentum has really done so much for. So I'm curious to see what it's going to look like now when it's a little more, not start from scratch, because obviously you've built up until this point, but a little bit of a reset, to say the least. So I give Houston the advantage, even though I mentioned the way that I like Syracuse matches up against this team. I think, the glass is going to be the focal point. If Syracuse can win the boards, then this becomes a whole different conversation. And as much as that starts with Marek Dolezaj, you got to keep an eye on Quincy Guerrier. I think his role as a scorer has certainly dialed back a bit. 12 points yesterday, as did Dolezaj, also have 12. But I think both of those guys, more of their efforts are going to be focused on the glass, because that it's become clear that really is just their job from this point moving forward. Not to say that they're not going to be involved in other areas. Of course they are. But if they can get things going on the glass, particularly on the offensive glass, it's a whole new ball game for the Cuse.
When I look at Houston, I sort of see a better San Diego State. Like they remind me of each other in a way. Obviously Houston is better in the majority of facets, but you look at a team that's got really, really solid KenPom ratings, but once again, they haven't really played that tough schedule, the non-conference. You've got to win against Texas Tech. But Texas Tech was a very polarizing team this year. They had very good days. They had very bad days. So it doesn't mean the world to me that they beat Texas Tech early in the season. But when you look at the remainder of their schedule, you're not playing against top tier opponents. And so when you get into the tournament, and I was saying this before we got on, I would have loved to have been in Rutgers' shoes and to be that sort of first quality tournament opponent that Houston had to square off with, because Houston came out yesterday and Kelvin Sampson said, we did not play a good game. And sometimes the other team plays a good game and you don't play a good game. And they were able to escape, fortunately, because, Rutgers had a handful of terrible possessions down the stretch. And that was one of the big reasons. But when you've got a guy like Quentin Grimes, who he creates shots. He is a phenomenal scorer, one of the better players in the country, in my opinion. And then I got to give this man his props. DeJon Jarreau, what a day yesterday. He gets hurts the hip in their opening tournament game against Cleveland State. Really only played like a minute in that game. And they were saying every time he runs, he is in like utter pain out of the hip. He comes in yesterday and scores 10 pretty quick first half points, scores 17 for him, and was just battling, like really, really battling. And I got to tip the cap to him. It was a gritty and gutsy performance out of that guy. So he's got my respect going into this game. When you were talking about the defense, Ben, I believe a little bit, and one of the big things I saw at Houston, where Rutgers actually had a lot of success yesterday, was Rutgers' composure against a trap or a double team. And as we all watched that sort of final minute yesterday, Syracuse did not necessarily show that same composure against the trap or the double team, albeit they did in their half set possessions. They were okay, because that was something that West Virginia tried to do, and trap on screens and double on screens. But that's something that I saw Houston's defense really, really doing in their defensive sets, and something that Syracuse is definitely going to need to do is maintain that composure and really look for guys when they do try to trap, because that is the one thing. And it's very straightforward. It seems like the sort of rec league basketball approach to this, but when they try to trap, someone is wide open. So if you can get a quick pass before that trap gets there, it is going to give you pretty much a 4v3 opportunity on the non-trap side of the ball. And that's where Syracuse can get its open shots. That's where Syracuse is going to need to get its open shots in order to be able to give Houston a run here.
Yeah, the success against the trap versus West Virginia was mixed. I praised Dolezaj's passing. There was one time he was trapped at half, turned around and threw the ball 10 feet over the head of Joe Girard out of bounds. I think the good thing for Syracuse, if you're looking at that game and then going into this game, I don't think anyone presses better and traps better in the country than West Virginia. I know Houston does it a lot, but Bob Huggins, that's basically what he earns his paycheck on, is that press and that trap. And the Orange, now have more time to prepare for it, but obviously that means Houston has more time to prepare for the zone. It's going to be interesting, I think, the minutes distribution between Joe and Kadari, as it has been all year. Even though Joe is playing better, just with his height, I think he's more easily trappable. You get two guys that are taller, longer to come trap him. If you get him, in that corner right as he crosses half, where you kind of use out of bounds and the midcourt line as an extra defender, that's troublesome for Joe, because he frankly can't always jump over and pass over those guys' arms. He needs to find a way around them. So that'll be a big factor. And to go back to Jarreau, I think, he's going to end up being a big factor in whether Syracuse can score or not. How healthy is he? He was the AAC Defensive Player of the Year. He's a major guy for this team, despite not being, named Quentin Grimes. So if he can lock up Buddy Boeheim, which is a tough task, that's a major issue for Syracuse. That matchup between Giroux and Boeheim on one side, and then just Giroux's offensive output versus the 2-3 on the other side, could end up being the key to who wins this game.
Yeah, and you look at this Houston team and, pretty similar to Syracuse. They're not a team that's going to run you 10, 11 guys deep. They got their 7 or 8, and that's about it. And, another name just worth keeping an eye on in terms of the X's and O's is Marcus Sasser for Houston. This is a guy who went 0 for 5 from downtown yesterday, just 1 for 9 from the field overall. So they don't necessarily have the most efficient shooters in the world, and that's why they don't carry the rep like the San Diego State team did in terms of really being one of the more knockdown teams in the country, but they certainly can turn it on when guys hit their stride. Now, we haven't seen this Houston team all collectively put it together. It's been a lot of individually pieced strong games, and obviously yesterday it was Grimes, and Giroux had himself a very solid day at the office too, as you mentioned, Owen. But this Houston team becomes that much more scary when it's beyond just those two, when all the guys really are clicking. And as I said, that's something they haven't really done yet. So you figure a number 2 seed, it's only a matter of time until they start to piece it all together, and they have the time to prepare for Syracuse too. So it should be interesting to see if they keep that same identity that they have through the first 2 games of, okay, we're going to go as far as Quentin Grimes takes us, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You mentioned Owen, he's one of the best players in college basketball. So if there's anyone you want putting the team on your back, it's him. But I think a similar narrative can be said for Syracuse, where, okay, we kind of know what we're going to get out of Buddy at this point. The question becomes who else is stepping up, and how much of an effort do we see from, our 3rd and 4th leading scorer? How much are they really giving us? That's going to be the X factor for both of these teams, to see who keeps dancing to the Elite 8. As crazy as that sounds, I say it and it just sounds so ridiculous. But yeah, keep an eye on that for sure.
It's like free basketball here. I think we're all past where we thought Syracuse would be. You rewind, I don't know, late February. This is not a tournament team. Jim Boeheim said it wasn't a tournament team. Now you look at it, since the month of March, Syracuse is the number 5 ranked team per Bart Torvik since the calendar flipped from February to March. And I'll tell you what, that is exactly what you want. You want to make that jump in March. That's where Jim Boeheim thrives. 9-2 Syracuse is all time as a double-digit seed in the tournament. That is just unfathomable to see their success. As a 10 seed, they make it to the Final Four. As an 11, they're a last team in. They make it to the Sweet 16. Once again, as an 11, back in the Sweet 16. Jim Boeheim, you can say what you want about the zone in the regular season. You can say what you want about him not being able to recruit in certain situations. These are all of the complaints that you hear throughout the year. Syracuse fans, maybe you can quiet down. You can put up with what happens in season if this is going to be your postseason success. I mean, you got to take this for what it's worth. I think you can put up with a couple of months of mediocrity if you're going to play top 5 basketball in the month of March, and that is what you've seen out of Syracuse. Houston, late one, 9:55 on Saturday. You can catch all of that action on WAER, 88.3 FM, WAER.org, the WAER app. There are so many ways to hear that content, that broadcast. I'll tell you what, you can sync up your TV to our radio broadcast, get the best of both worlds. You can still see, you can still hear us, and it's going to be late post-game coverage. So for all of you people that aren't the greatest sleepers or are still amped after this Sweet 16 game, you can easily find yourself something to do until the wee hours of the night. I believe it's going to be going until 2 a.m. once again. So get those calls in and get your voice heard. Start shouting over there, because that is going to be an exciting game. And if you need your Syracuse fill before then, you've got top 5 lacrosse. Syracuse, Duke, 7 p.m. on Thursday. Duke is unbelievable, and they add Michael Sowers, which is just got to be illegal. If you take one of the best teams in the country, you add the number one recruit in the country, and you add the number one transfer in the country. It's a tough combo, but that's why you got to play lacrosse. So 7 p.m. on Thursday, big one for Syracuse Lax, and then obviously the big one for Syracuse men's basketball as well. All that coverage on WAER. If you're still with us, thank you so much. Find us on Twitter at Ostrom Avenue Pod. Like this video, subscribe if you're with us on YouTube. You can turn that bell on, get notified the second we post videos so you can get all the action, all of our content, all of our analysis. Same goes for Twitter. You can turn our tweet notifications on. You can see Owen rant about various things throughout the game and do all of that. And if you're listening to us wherever you get your podcast, subscribe, leave a review, leave a rating. They are all very valuable to us. We had some people fired in the comments on our last YouTube video, so keep that morale up and keep doing that. I mean, I just didn't think we'd be here at this point. So I'm all smiles. These are just bonus episodes for me at this point. So for Ben Shulman and Johnny Gadamowitz, I'm Owen Valentine. This has been the Ostrom Avenue Podcast. Stay safe. We'll catch you next week.